Hey everybody, Jason Cutter here. Welcome back to part 2, segment 2 of the conversation I'm having with Dr. Terry Lowe from Kennesaw State University. This is the Authentic Persuasion Show. I am on a mission to help fill the world with authentic persuaders and to bring this kind of content to people, especially, again, to shift the way sales is done. If you didn't catch part 1, shame on you. Go back and listen to it or watch it, find it. It's going to be everywhere. If you found this, you can find that. And we're going to continue our conversation. So for people who are just tuning in, if I want you to go back and catch part 1, but if you're just tuning in, Terry has been in the world of professional sales education for a long time, going into academia in 91 after 11 years in sales, working in sales programs, and he's now at Kennesaw State University. He's been there for quite some time and running their Center for Professional Selling. He is the founder of the National Collegiate Sales Competition, starting that in 1999. Again, I didn't even know there was a world of professional sales education or competitions until a couple of years ago. Yet this man has been doing it for quite some time. Real quick, funny story. I always refer to you as Dr. Terry because that's professional and courteous and you've earned it. But you correct me every time we jump on. You're like, no, just Terry. And why is that? You told me this once before, and I just thought it was hilarious. I wanted to bring it up real quick.
My wife is a real doctor. She's a medical doctor. And I said, PhDs were known as doctors before medical doctors were. And she said, if we're on an airplane and somebody says, is there a doctor on a plane? Are you going to jump up? I said, well, if there's a sales emergency, probably, but there's not really that many of those out there. No, I'm just a regular person.
I love it. It's so funny because I remember when you told me that to relative to calling you doctor, and I was just laughing because it's true. If someone says, hey, is there a doctor? They're not asking for you. Maybe if on the plane, flight attendants who are required to pitch the airline's credit card and mileage program, they have some kind of sales question or an objection they can't handle. At some point they might start saying, hey, is there a sales doctor in the house? Someone like yourself could run in and help them close the deal to talk someone into a high interest credit card.
That's a real situation because my wife actually had to resuscitate somebody on a trip back from France one time. They said, is there a doctor on the plane? She had him in the floor, had to use the paddles and everything. We got a bottle of champagne for her saving his life.
I guess there's an oath and a code that she took to do that and when necessary, but still you think a little more. So let's talk about sales process. One of the biggest things we touched on in the beginning of part 1 was about the fact that you fell into sales. Here, take your Series 7, take your Series 6. Here's the phone book back when there were phone books. Here's a phone back when there were landlines and phones. And it's like, here, now just start dialing. What was the process you had? Was it just to throw features and talk to people and try to move them into things? Were you given a process? Did you have to figure it out on the go?
I actually had some sales experience prior to that. I had to raise money for a restaurant chain. I was the marketing director for it when I was 22, 23 years old. And the president of the company were selling limited partnerships. So he said, call the doctors in this town. We're going in different towns. We're going to build these restaurants and get them to invest. So I knew no better. I just called, got a hold. I didn't know you weren't not supposed to be able to get a hold of doctors. I was not married to my wife at that time. So I just called, talked to the secretary, the receptionist, or the nurse and said, we're going to be coming into town and we've got this great idea for a restaurant and want to look for investors. And I guess I was being authentic back then too, because I got a lot of responses to that. Got a lot of doctors coming in. That's basically what I did. I said, I've got this product or service or whatever it is, and stumbled through. And then as I read more and as I read some of the old guys, and I did everything Zig Ziglar, I went to conferences, read his books, read all the books I can get a hold of at that time. And his is the main one I think of. And then to start watching other people who are successful. And one of the things I found when I was doing financial services is I was on the phone a bit, but then I started doing educational lunches for investors, and I was selling tax-free bonds. And so I would set up a lunch and I pay for lunch, and I would do an educational seminar on investing in general, tax-free investments specifically. And then I started gathering prospects that way because they would come and eat free lunch and they were interested in investments. So I stumbled into it, had success, but it was purely by accident, trial and error, and still didn't understand anything about how people make decisions and why they do it. I just thought this ought to be good for them, so I'll talk to them. So that was it. There was no, until I finished my doctoral work and started teaching sales and looking at actually doing research in the 90s, that I then discovered the science piece of it. And of course, for good or bad, academics do discover some things that are useful and helpful. So the art side of it melded into the science side of it, understanding it's complex when you're dealing with humans and the human mind. You start discovering that. And there's research studies that were back in 81, 82, and then another one in 91, 92 that did a meta-analysis of all the studies that were out there. And there was actually 114 variables that impacted in a significant way or some significant way of how well a salesperson performed. And not any one of them made a bigger impact than about 13%. And that was basically being adaptable. I didn't have a good education until I started studying it and researching it and doing that and figuring it out basically on what a lot of other people did in research.
So what have you found in that? And of course, this just, it partially makes me sad because a lot of people I think have the same experience as you do of going into sales in a company who is in love with their product and thinks they're amazing and teaches the product, but not the sales. And then people don't have a process or don't actually understand all these things. And you didn't find out until you were doing the research and got to decide, which most people will never do. What did you find, or what have you found over the years as far as processes that work? If we're talking about persuading someone and moving them out of their comfort zone and helping them make a decision that requires change and all the dangers in that, right? Like you're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of need. It's what processes or what have you found is universally useful, right? Not everything is one size fits all, but.
And this is a conversation I often have with industry. You get to the naturally born versus somebody who has learned how to do sales, and that's a different conversation, but it's which process are you using, which methodology, what are you teaching in your universities? And here's what we have found. The sales processes are, take it back, the decision process doesn't change. So you look at how people make decisions forever and all the way into the future, that's not going to really change. The tools we use might change, and we might shorten the cycle some because we have more access to information, et cetera. But the people don't change fundamentally when they make a decision. So there's a basics, and there's some great books out there, great processes, and we've looked at the Challenger and customer centered selling and the Sandler system, and those are all great. But what we try to do is just boil it down to the basics of what's included or what's consistent through each one of those different ones. We teach a lot of spin. I think that's the easiest for a young person to understand, or somebody just getting into sales. It's just basic questions of understanding your situation, what's the issues, challenges, and what's the impact or implication, and then what's the need payoff of actually accomplishing something or getting what you want. I think there's many that are good. I think finding one and sticking to it. I think you can make it real complex, and you don't need to, especially in introductory and the people who are getting into it. I think as you get into more complex sales, longer sales cycles, there's more nuance in that and understanding where you are in the process. But we just teach the basics, and we'll use spin selling. I use customer-centered selling, customer-centric selling. There's a combination of all those in there. We want our students, when they graduate, to be prepared to understand whatever language, whatever methodology that a company is going to be using. And, what's really shocking, and I'm not as shocked as I used to be, but there's some really big companies, billion-dollar companies, that don't really have a great process in place. So I think that's part of what we're trying to do as well. In all these sales programs, we partner with about 30 companies, and they're involved in our classes. Our students shadow their salespeople. And so they come into our classes and they get to pick up on what we're talking about. And most of them, many of them, actually the rubric that we use to evaluate a sales call, they will take that back and use that. And again, I didn't invent it. I'm standing on the shoulders of many people who have done this and who have put ideas together, and I basically steal a lot of great ideas from people who I learned from. That's the process. We don't have any one basic one. We'll use spin, but I think most all of them are good. You just got to find one that you're going to use and understand how to get through your process.
So when we talk about the art and the science, like we left off on part one about now moving into the science, the persuasion piece, the sales process. In part one, you brought up this analogy with golf where the science of golf is really clear. It's physics. Like if you take this action and hit the ball like this, it will go there. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking of the art and the science where you brought up that's good. The physics is clear, right? You can do the math all you want. But then when you get into weird situations and non-standard things like in the rough, behind a tree, you said, you've got to be creative. And I'm thinking that's perfect because in golf, like you can go to the driving range, you can hit off the perfect little plastic grass mat over and over again until you get it down. And that's great. But then there's the real world, which is what drives every golfer absolutely mad. And why I go golfing with a couple dozen extra balls in my bag, because I don't want to spend time holding everyone up looking for all my balls that go in wayward directions because I'm not that skilled. So when I thought about that, I thought about sales too, right? Because there's learning it, there's practicing it, there's the driving range equivalent of practicing sales and role playing and even your competitions, which we'll talk about. And then there's the real world, which is you can practice and role play all you want until that customer just hits you with something like a load of bricks that you then have to figure out and be creative. Where is that balance in what you found with professional sales education and even your competitions, if you want to talk about that? Because I know when I first heard about it, I was like, competitions sound pointless because you can't judge people based on something that's art and science, but you've obviously done well at working on that. So where does that fit in with the creative side of?
I have an analogy that I use with the students. So when you're learning any skill, you are first an unconscious, incompetent, I'm not aware. And then I become aware that I need to change. So I become a conscious incompetent. It's like, I guess you got to know that you have a need. And then as you start learning the best ways to do it, you become a conscious competent. And I played baseball in college, had a chance to go to the College World Series a couple of times, played in minor league professional camps. And so I had a lot in baseball, but anytime I'm learning a new swing, and if you'll watch any professional sports teams, whether it's baseball, basketball, football, they always practice the fundamentals. You go to a professional basketball practice, and I've seen the Atlanta Hawks and a couple others practice. They're practicing layups, they're practicing dribbling, and there's certain techniques that they need to know and learn. And from golf, if you try to change your swing, which I do that probably every swing, I'm trying to change it. I have a comfortable swing because that's the way I hit a baseball, but the golf swing's different and it's uncomfortable. But the more and more I practice it, the more comfortable I become with it, and the more it becomes unconscious in the way that I do it, so that I've got to have enough reps in. So if I'm learning a new swing in baseball, I'm putting a tee up, I'm putting a ball on top of the tee, and I'm going to get all set, and the ball's not going to move. I'm not going to have any surprises. It's just going to sit there versus a 94-mile-an-hour fastball, and then I'm going to get an 85-mile-an-hour splitter that's coming in. That's hard to adjust to, but if I have my mechanics down, I have a much better chance of doing it. So in sales, what I tell our students and what I tell the companies we work with, and we have judges coming to these competitions. So we try to get our students involved and young people involved as soon as possible into doing role plays. This is like in the batting cage. I want you to get the reps in to understand the process to do it. Once I do that and I get comfortable with the process, then I don't have to focus so much on the mechanics, and I can become more creative. So I see the world differently. And like baseball, in high school, I'm facing 82, 83 mile an hour. In college, I'm facing 90, 95 with them doing all kinds of things with the ball. So when I got to college, I had to make adjustments to my swing to be quicker to the ball and mentally think differently about it. But that's hours and hours. So when we have our students in role play in any company that we do training for, so you need to do role play, because especially when you're learning a new process, I'm not going to lose a sale in a role play. I'm not going to destroy a client or a potential client because I'm role playing, but I do get a feel for what's happening and what may happen. Because then after a few rounds of role plays, we might make some changes, raise some different objections, have a different personality style for the buyer. And so they get used to that and get more confident with it, which I think that's why many of the companies early on, especially, you hire all of these people, you don't train them, you put them out there, and then they fail. And some of them might have been great salespeople, but they got burned and they didn't know how to do it. So you got to put them in a position to win and to have success. So doing those reps over and over again, and then when I face a situation in the real world, I'm much more comfortable. And actually probably doing a real world sales call is much easier than doing a role play, because people are watching, we record it, and people are watching you. But once I understand the process, I know what I'm going to do next. So I know where I'm trying to lead the conversation, and I can think outside the box. I don't have to focus on the process if I've got enough reps in. So the science part allows me to get comfortable and confident. And then when I do that, the world slows down for me. So again, the baseball analogy, when I was 18 years old, a 95-mile-an-hour fastball looked a lot different than when I was 20, because I'd seen a lot of them. And so I was able to hit it. And the same way, I need to let the world slow down a little bit so I can back up. And when I'm in a meeting, I'm in a sales call, things come at you really fast when you're experienced. But when you have the experience, whether you do a lot of reps, then that's going to allow me to really focus on more than just the process. I can listen. I can actually listen and interact with the person. And that allows me to be creative. The more information I have and the more categories I can put that information in, the more creative and adaptable I can be. So it's again about getting the knowledge you need to deal with certain situations, and then understanding the process well enough through reps and practice and role plays, so that I can actually then, when something happens weird, the customer looks at me and says, "I don't like your face," and I'd never heard that before, then I can back up and say, "Okay, let's talk about that," rather than just panicking. The science side of it helps you gain confidence and helps you understand the best path, but that path is going to deviate a bit because the situation is not the same. You're going to be in the sand.
And I think that's really the lesson I learned from speaking with someone like yourself, and when we spoke before, and then also the other educators, is that, okay, but competitions, that's not the real world, right? There's a rubric and people are trained and going at that. But no matter what, you're talking about that evolution, which I think is important, from the unconscious incompetent. I don't know what I don't know. And then I do know what I don't know. And then now I know what I know. And then the unconscious competence, which is, I don't even have to think about it. The mechanics are there. It's autopilot. I trust myself. And in sales, it's so important because then you stop thinking about what you're going to do next. And then you, like you said, you slow down time to the point where I don't have to worry about what I'm going to do next. I tell people this all the time. Your success in sales will come when you no longer have to think about what you're going to say and do next. You can actually just be present and listen, and you don't have to worry about that. And I love that analogy. And it's true, right? I think one thing you mentioned is that companies don't do enough training and then throw people out there. A lot of times it just crushes someone's ego, their hopes, their dreams. It would be literally like taking you've never played baseball, you're 18 years old, we show you a movie on baseball, let you read some books on baseball, and then throwing you into the game and having that 94-mile-an-hour fastball come at you, a couple of those, and you're going home crying, and it's over. But that's what companies do to salespeople all the time.
That's actually my senior year on the baseball team. I was the team captain, and we'd gone to the World Series before. We were ranked 5th in the country, so we had a lot of people trying out. And the coach called me aside and said, "You need to go talk to this kid out there who I think is going to get hurt." So I find him. He's literally he's nothing. In Division I baseball, you need to have a little bit of size and skill level, but he was probably 5'7", 5'8", maybe. He probably weighed 120, 30, 40 pounds. He was literally throwing the ball up and trying to hit it into the screen with a bat. And walked over to him. And this again, we've got 150 people trying out for the team, and only 25 make it. He said, I said, I introduced myself, said, "How you doing?" I said, "Tell me about your background in baseball." And this is a true story that you hear this analogy all the time. He said, I never played, but I've read a lot of books. And this is before YouTube. So there was no YouTube for him to watch. He literally said, "I've read a lot of books." And so that's not the way we train people and do it. And so in our classrooms and with that competition, and one of the reasons that competition started, and we helped other schools start competitions, is that from my experience with the World Series, where you have what you have in that situation, you have all the players, the quote unquote best players in the country, playing against each other. You have all the best coaches in the country there. And then you have all the scouts coming. So in that situation, we all stayed in the same hotel. I started meeting other players and other coaches and obviously the scouts. So that competition, I thought, why don't we get all the schools together to have this competition? Now, again, it's not real world, but they are doing what it is that a company's hiring them to do, so they can at least watch them and scout them. And so we got the scouts there, the companies, and we got the coaches there, and it's turned into an opportunity for us to interact with each other. We get to know the students. Our students develop a network across the country with other like-minded kids who are going into sales, who are going to be sales leaders. So that was the reason for that. And I'm not sure if I answered the question you asked. I just got off on a tangent.
No, absolutely. And again, I think what's interesting is that anybody hearing that story about the player that was trying out for the team that you're talking about, and that caliber and that level, and everybody would probably agree that's ridiculous. That's not how it works. Not that they can't make the team, but it takes more than just reading about it. Yet companies just think, okay, and I'm going to stop right there because I want to ask you a question about it, but that's going to be in segment 3, and we can talk about the future of sales and why that happens and why companies do that. But I think that analogy is great because you wouldn't do that in that or expect any results. Yet companies do that all the time. So ending that here, stopping the conversation on persuasion and the sales process. for people tuning in, if you want to connect, if you want to find out more, if you want to follow what Terry is posting, you can go to LinkedIn, Terry Lowe, Loe. You can find him on there. Also, the Kennesaw State University's website on their Professional Selling Institute. The link will be in the show notes, and you can also Google it. If you don't have access to the show notes and you just want to look it up, you can find him and everything he's doing through the program, the competitions, all of that great work that he's doing, including the foundations, the alliance, everything that he's involved with. Terry, thank you for being here on part 2 and sharing all this. And I literally can't wait to part 3. And for everyone tuning in, once again, thank you for being here, being a part of this journey, all of this stuff. Hopefully you tune in to part 3. Hopefully you've gotten some value from this. And once again, thank you for helping fill the world with authentic persuaders.